Well, that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen with those candles, and it's like one of those 1980s AA service announcements. I guess I'll start with, my name's Rich, I'm alcoholic, and the candle's going. Now I got to do it in real life. I thank you to the committee for including me in your party. I'm real clear that you all could be having this party without me, and I can't stay sober without you. And that's probably the most important thing for for me to remember, is that I need AA a lot more than AA needs me. And I always like to keep that in perspective. I've had come to you from Ocean City, Maryland. I have a home group there called the Fresh Air Group. We were cleverly named as the first non-smoking meeting in our area about 50 years back. That was, I guess, novel. And I'm allowed to tell you that after a lengthy group conscience over whether they'd claim me or not. They went back and were, don't say that when you're out there. And then they voted, and now I can say it. You know how group consciences go. But I've had a couple of sponsors so far. I want to start off by telling you that. I was separated from alcohol, I guess, the most important thing in my life. I ought to tell you first. That was August the 30th of '04. I didn't quit drinking. I didn't put the plug in the jug. My best thinking didn't bring me to you. None of that crap I sometimes hear in meetings is true in my case. In fact, if any of that was true, aside from just being really arrogant, I'd be non-alcoholic. It would imply that I had power, choice, and control. If I quit drinking, my best thinking brought me to you. I think I'll join AA and stop drinking. None of that is true. On August the 29th of that year, I was falling down drunk. And on August the 30th, I didn't have to have a drink all day. And to the best of my knowledge, you all don't have a step, a paragraph, a chapter. There's nothing in your book that talks about that. You talk about the power that makes that possible and how I could come to know it and interact with it in my life and accept this wonderful gift, and to learn how to accept it, protect it, and respect it is what the AA program is all about, and learning how to live in a very uncomfortable state for me, sober. Because if you're really alcoholic, it turns out, as we've all learned, that alcohol is not the problem. It's this very uncomfortable condition called sober. And it seems that, that's strange in AA, right? It's like a thing called alcoholism. I actually suffer from sobriety, so much so that whenever I find myself in that awkward state, I need to change it rather quickly. And as soon as I get that, you guys know what I'm talking about, it gets me to a place where I'm okay for a limited period of time. At least I think so. A couple men have guided me in this journey. The first gentleman was a man named Jim. Jim he was my first sponsor. He had a sponsor by the name of Clarence Snyder, who had a sponsor by the name of Dr. Bob Smith. I tell you that because it's good to know what you're getting and where it comes from so you could square it up. I still have a sponsor named Roger, and Roger's got a pacemaker, congestive heart failure, some other stuff going on with his heart, and still has the spring in his step that he had all those years ago in love for Alcoholics Anonymous. He thought that he might not make it a few years ago. We were in the hospital a lot, and one of he thought would be his last acts of sponsorship was to make sure that I had a new sponsor. He said, you can't be one of these guys running around AA, with no sponsor, going, oh, I had the same guy for over a decade. I'll never find anybody like that again. Woe is me. He's like, you got a wife, a young child, life's going to happen. I want to know who's going to sponsor you. I want to approve it. Then you're going to go ask them, and then you're going to tell me that you asked them. And I said, well, what about that guy you went to college with at Notre Dame, that guy Bob from up there at Minnesota area, if any of you know. I said, he talks a lot about family and some of the stuff I'm going through and, successes and failures in terms of being a good man and husband and father, and seems to be rather current with his AA experience in that area. He said, that would be a good choice. Go ask him, come back. And I did. I said, I don't want to be asking you this, but my sponsor thinks he's dying, and if he does, will you be in? He said, no, but if you start calling me every Wednesday to establish the relationship, I'll do it right now. And you know how that turns out. So Roger didn't die. He's been gone another 3 years, so now I've got two people to call. And so I call Roger at 7 a.m., Bob on Wednesdays. I call them my spiritual board of directors. I just got to I report in, they vote, and then I try to carry out their actions. And that's my version of a third step. I grew up outside of Baltimore, Maryland, on a little horse farm. I didn't know that anything about our circumstances until I got to third grade. My parents took me out of public school. I loved it. Up to that point, I just remember loving school, having a ton of friends. They took me out of that school to send me to a private school. I had a 45-minute bus ride to school every day. I hated that. I hated the private school. I found out that I went to school with rich kids and that I was poor. I didn't know that until I went there because, third graders are kind like that. They just tell you. And they would make fun of me for, I'd have to muck stalls and stuff in the morning. They'd call me redneck, farm boy, things like that. Baseball player named Cal Ripken moved into that neighborhood about 10 years later, and all of a sudden it went from farm boy to like country estates, and but it wasn't when I was in third grade. They were still making fun of me. There was a rule at that school where, like, the older kids, it's almost a social hierarchy, on school buses. I don't know if they have that here, but the older kids sit in the back of the school bus, the younger kids up front. They assigned me a kid at that school. His only job was to beat me up every day for something. His name was Reed, and I've never gone back to check that out with the school to see if they really assigned me that. But, alcoholics aren't big on facts. It's all about perception. And it seemed like they assigned him to me, and he was good at his job. And there was a girl on the school bus that looked a lot like, God, a lot of you women sitting around here just put together. I mean, good looking. And her name was Nikki, and I didn't know how to talk to Nikki. I didn't know how to interact with Nikki. I mean, I had nothing going. Nobody in my family drinks. I have one little sister. She's 3 years younger. Mom and Dad don't drink. I come from an amazing family, which really didn't help when I got to AA. It kind of piled onto the guilt factor, because I'd listen to your stories and I'd think, well, no wonder, she's alcoholic. I mean, what's your excuse, pal? I'd look in the mirror and like double down on guilt, because I came from a family with just morals, values, integrity. None of them drank. No parents, no aunts, no uncles, no grandparents. So any genetic theories of alcoholism, rock on if that's what you think. Our book says that we have no opinion as a fellowship on that. My sponsor says he thinks I became alcoholic by drinking too much. So I've just gone, that's as good as any. I've gone with it. And if you're new, I hope you don't waste too much time trying to figure out, how this could have happened. How did I become alcoholic? And I like to tell the story for those folks that are doing that mental dance that I did of, trying to figure it out. It's like a guy or gal whose house is burning to the ground. Everything important, everything you love, everything precious in life is in that home, and it's burning to the ground. But the fire department's already there. They got all the trucks lined up. The hoses are screwed into those hydrants. The water's running. The neighbors are all out in the front yard watching the house burn to the ground. And they're all screaming at me. There's, Rich, shoot the hose. Would you please shoot the hose? But I'm up front. I control the hose. And I'm going, well, wait a second. Before we shoot this water and put the fire out, we got to figure out how this fire started. I mean, and I submit to you that in that moment, there is nothing less important than how the fire started when you've got everything you need right here to never take another drink of alcohol. So I hope that debate can end tonight if you're struggling with it as I was. And what I'm about to tell you next is what makes me one of you. It's what alcohol does for me that makes me alcoholic. It's not what alcohol does to me. Alcohol does to the human body the same thing for every human being on planet Earth. If you put enough alcohol in a non-alcoholic, they'll eventually get sick. It's called alcohol poisoning. Alcohol is a poison. It's a depressant. The body expels it if you put enough of it in. Happens to everybody. Can't prevent it. You put enough alcohol in a non-alcoholic and put them behind the wheel of a car enough time, they'll get a DUI, or 2, or 3. That's the odds of drinking alcohol and driving a car. It does not necessarily mean you're alcoholic. You put enough alcohol in a non-alcoholic for a long enough period of time and stop abruptly, we'll shake, we'll sweat, we'll go through all those early signs of DTs. That's what alcohol does to the human body. None of that makes me alcoholic. But boy, what it does for me, and I'm willing to let it do all this to me in exchange for what it does for me. And the fact that I can remember it's a good hint, because if my job tonight was to tell you about my first glass of orange juice, you need to get somebody else. It was a non-event in my life. When was your first milk? I have no idea. So if you're sitting in this room and you could even remember the fact of what your first drink was, where it was, who you were with, I welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's a strong clue. Some of the older guys said to me, I believe I was in 7th grade, and they said, Rich, you want to skip last class and do some drinking? I'd never skipped any class. I'd never done any drinking. And out of my mouth came, you bet, like I'd been doing it all along. They said, what do you drink? And this is how you'll know that I had no idea I was going to end up in AA and have to, report back, which is kind of what I think this is, by the way, is sort of like reporting back what you guys gave me in the great experiment of AA. You guys said, try these steps in your life and report back. We're not interested in what you think about them on the front end. Just do them and report back. So that's my job tonight, is just to report back on what you all gave me, and been doing a long time before I got here. But on this day, they said, what do you drink? And I said, bourbon. And I don't know where I got that, because I'd never had anything. And I wish that was true, getting to come to Tennessee, right? I mean, to say I had bourbon would be pretty cool. But what those guys had was peach schnapps. And I know, you're already laughing at me because it's so weenie. I mean, that's embarrassing, right? To come to Tennessee and say my first drink was peach schnapps. I mean, it's like you might as well get like a 6-year-old girl up here to tell you, right? Like, but that's what I had. And the important part is, though, like what I just told you, it's what it does for me. It doesn't matter what I drank, how often I drank it, how long I drank it, none of that. It's just what it did for me. And on that day, those guys are passing it around, and it would come to me, and I'd drink it down, and it'd come around, and I'd drink it down. And after a little bit, you know what I noticed is that those older guys were as lucky to be hanging out with me as I was with them. And I'd never felt like that, just one of the fellas, kind of equal. And the next thing that happened is I started walking to that school bus. And somehow, with this peach schnapps in me, I decided I was going to sit down next to Nikki, and I was going to talk to Nikki on that school bus. I just intuitively knew how to handle this situation that used to baffle me. And the only thing that had changed in my life was the addition of peach schnapps. I had not had girl talking lessons, dance lessons, smooth lines for co-eds, none of that. I'd taken no, I just drank peach schnapps and somehow knew how to talk to Nikki. And I don't know that happens for everybody. But I get on that school bus, and I'm walking back to sit next to Nikki, and Reed gets up out of his seat to give me my daily beating. And as Reed gets up out of his seat, I gave him everything I had in my little body, and Reed went down and out on that bus seat. I mean, he was out cold. And I sat down next to Nikki, and I'm looking at Nikki, and Nikki's looking at me. And I'm looking at Nikki. Nikki's looking at me. And there was this total silence on that school bus, and it was like long overdue respect. I mean, some of you guys know what I'm talking about. I mean, that silence, it said everything in the silence. And we got to her bus stop, and she leaned over. Before she got off that school bus, she gave me this little kiss that was different than my mother and my aunts had ever kissed me. It was half on my lips and half on my cheek, and I felt it in my toes, boy. It was something. And she got off that bus and went in her house, and we got to my little bus stop, and I went in my house with those good parents and those rules and integrity and morality. And they knew I was drunk. And they left me in the bathroom to be sick all night to teach me a lesson. And that was going to be the first of what would become a common theme. Many people in my life were going to teach me a lesson, hoping I would straighten up. But there is no price too great for what alcohol does for me, it turns out. What I didn't know in that experience was my relationship with alcohol was going to forever change in that experience. And I can't say it any better than Bill did. This thing that gave me so much was going to be set in flight, much like a boomerang. And while that boomerang was going out, man, it was going to give me so much for so long. But one day it was going to turn in flight and come back and nearly shred me to ribbons. And that alcohol was going to take from me, or I was going to surrender to it, however you like to say it, every bit of integrity, every bit of morality, every bit of decency those wonderful parents gave me. And the catch is, I was going to do it so slow, just like we get sober. I was going to surrender that morality one drink at a time, so slow that I didn't know I was doing it, to the point where my life was unrecognizable from the life that those parents had given me. And they leave me in that bathroom. I wake up the next morning. I was sick as a dog. I was grounded forever. I don't know if anybody remembers grounded forever, but that's a big deal in 7th grade. It's like life without parole for you prison guys. And I saw some of the tattoos out there. I know you're here. And you know what my thought was? I mean, the next thought was I don't ever remember feeling that sick to that point in life, and I don't ever remember being in more trouble. I mean, sick as a dog and grounded forever. And my next thought was, are you ever going to do any more of that drinking? You bet. You bet. I mean, are you kidding me? Sick as a dog and grounded forever? What a small price to pay for what I had going on that school bus. That silence and that kiss. And I mean, you got to be kidding me. And I drank as much as I could, for the next period of time and through high school. High school drinking in Maryland is cornfield drinking. You build bonfires, get kegs of beer. One time I drove my first car was a CJ7 with no doors, no roof. At narrow wheelbase, we'd put a keg of beer in the back and pack a bunch of guys and girls in there. And I had 4 buddies in there. I came around a turn too fast, and that Jeep rolled about 3 or 4 times, and everybody got sprayed out of the car. And everybody was cut up and banged up, a couple broken bones, but no serious injuries. And you know what I think? Did you see that right there? That was some good drunk driving. I mean, that was NASCAR type stuff right there. I mean, that might capture the attention, right? Our book says of a heavy drinker, a hard drinker, but an alcoholic of my variety, rolling a car 3 times, barely surviving, almost killing your 4 best friends. My thought is that's some good drunk driving, right? I mean, that was NASCAR. We rolled that thing 3 times, landed on our feet, and walked away. It's just things that should get normal people's attention just go right past me. I eventually, I've learned from our 6th and 7th step that God gives each of us a really wonderful and unique set of character assets and defects and whatever we like to call those, shortcomings and gifts, some of us like to call them. And I will say that I think one of the neat things about Alcoholics Anonymous, those of you that I follow around that I've noticed stay here, and happily, by the way, and excited about this thing for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, are the ones that seem to figure out through this step process what those gifts are and use 100% of those to the best of your ability to make Alcoholics Anonymous a better place each day. And somehow we've changed from a taker into a giver and utilizing each of our specific gifts to make this precious thing, Alcoholics Anonymous, better. You're the ones that are walking around with a smile on your face that are still here after 50 years. Those of us that use those gifts to go do something else don't seem to stick around as long. But from this inventory, I learned that I've been given 2 things that I had nothing to do with. When I read something, I can tell you what page it's on and what paragraph for the rest of my life. So when I read a book, I just know, where it is. That turns out that when you're taking tests and the way our school system's set up, I get like straight A's. I don't have to study. I don't have study groups. I don't have to make friendships. I don't have to learn any of the integral lessons. I think that education is meant to learn how to work with other people, learn about a work to reward ratio. None of that. The night before the test, I go in the library, I read the book, I spit it back out, I get an A, you all put awards around my neck, you put ribbons, you say things like cum laude, you make up fancy Latin terms, and you advance me along through life, seemingly doing well, seemingly excelling. Meanwhile, I'm learning nothing about the important lessons of life. My sponsor tells me there's a huge difference. He just says, you've been educated far beyond your natural intelligence. And he was quick to point out, he's like, you got a lot of degrees behind your name. So does a rectal thermometer. You know what we do with those. So that's how helpful that stuff will be in Alcoholics Anonymous if anybody's feeling particularly brilliant tonight. But because of that, I get a... And the second thing was I'm good at sports. And again, I don't remember doing anything to achieve that. It just sort of happened. You are or you aren't. And because of that, I get an athletic and an academic scholarship to the University of San Diego, which is 3,000 miles from where I live, by the way. I live on the Atlantic Ocean, and I go to the Pacific Ocean. My college picking skills were these. I've surfed since before I can remember learning to surf. I was like this big. And my dad taught me I guess when I was learning to walk. I don't know. It's one of the greatest gifts he's ever given me, and I wanted to surf. I had to for the scholarship to play Division I soccer, and I wanted to be as far away as possible from those good parents and their rules and integrity and morality. So I picked the University of San Diego, and off I went to college. I overlooked one small thing. It's a Jesuit institution. I had no idea what Jesuits were. I could care less. I quickly fall in with some guys on the soccer team. There's 3 other guys on scholarship. They're from really right across the border, 19 miles south is Tijuana, Mexico. So these Mexican fellas are on my team. We become quick friends. Each of them have like 46 cousins that live right across the border. And I was pretty quick. Most alcoholics are to pick up on our surroundings. And in Southern California, it appeared to me, right? It's all that it was the guys that had some stuff that were getting the girls. Because I had an internal knowing that none of you women were going to want anything to do with a guy like me unless I could take you out first class. There was going to have to be flowers and a nice car and a nice dinner. You would never just like me for me. And I don't know why I had that internal knowing. No woman had ever said, like, you're ugly, you're stupid, I don't like you. I just had it. And that set me on a path much like Bill, where I was going to have to acquire some stuff in life. And I embarked on this material path without even knowing it. Hindsight's 20/20, in this step process and reflecting back. But I hook up with these fellas, and I'm bringing this green stuff across the border that the rich kids like smoking. I'm packing it up. I'm mailing it back east. I didn't forget Tennessee, don't worry. And I'm shipping this stuff. I'm drinking more and more and more. I've got these Jesuit classes. There's a lady. She's called an academic advisor. That might sound pretty neutral to you folks. It's not to me. Her job was to help me pick classes that maybe I'd graduate in 4 years. That's it. She's just trying to help me graduate. I don't see it that way. I think she's trying to tell me what to do. And that's another thing that has been revealed to me in inventory. There have been many people on that list, good people, that all they wanted to do is give me a little friendly nudge down the road of life. Just a helping hand. And I don't see it like that. In my life, anyone that's ever tried to help me, I think you're trying to hurt me. You're trying to hold me down. You're trying to tell me how to live my life. Back off. It's my life. Let me live it. And I don't know what that's all about, but I do know that our book says defiance is one of my number 1 characteristics of the alcoholic, and that certainly fits me. They had this other crazy idea that they wanted to get a student certified as an alcohol and drug counselor to start this office of alcohol and drug education on campus. It was going to be peer counseling, student to student, kind of the same premise that AA's founded on, identification, one alcoholic to another, except this was supposed to be student to student. And I remember things, and they said, this is going to be good. It'll look really good on your resume. If you want to go places in life, we're going to get you certified. You're going to be the founding father of the Office of Alcohol. And I said, I'm your guy. And so now they do that, and now my life's getting really busy. I'm the founding father of the Office of Alcohol and Drug Education. I got 2-a-day soccer practices for this Division I team. I got these Jesuit classes. Then I got the afternoon practice. Then I got to drink a lot because the worst part of my day is 7 to 10 p.m. I have office hours in that Office of Alcohol and Drug Education. That's when we're open for counseling, with you pathetic folks with your alcohol problems. And after I've drank enough to be able to go in there to help you with your problem, you guys come in and I give out AA pamphlets because you need it. And I'm there to help. And if anybody's, a little bit anxious about not drinking, come see me after office hours, and I'll get you squared away with that too. And then I got to do some shrink wrapping, and I got to drink enough to be able to fall asleep at night. And I have no idea what's going on and why my intake's increasing. I've learned since I've been here that a clean conscience makes for a soft pillow. And I would have told you I just needed to have a few drinks to fall asleep. I got a busy life. I got a lot going on. And what I now know is that, the book also talks about this thing that the alcoholic often lives a double life. And if I'd have just had 2 going on, that would have been wonderful. But There were no two people at that point in my life that could have been in the same room at the same time without me getting caught in a lie. If my mother talked to my little sister, there'd have been trouble because I had different stories going to each of them. If my mother had talked to the registrar at the college about what classes I was actually attending, there'd have been problems. If the registrar would have talked to the coach, trouble. If the coach would have talked to my teachers about where I was showing up, trouble. If my girlfriend had talked to my other girlfriend, big trouble. I mean, you got to keep all this separate, you know, and you burn up a lot of energy, it turns out, trying to do. You got to drink a lot, and it's hard to keep track of. By my senior year, I'd switched from the green stuff to the white stuff. I'd bought my first home in La Jolla, California, the third house on the right at Windansea Beach, 423 Nautilus Street. Windansea is one of the best surf spots in the world, but I don't surf anymore. Because when I drink, I just drink. When I drink, everything must go. Every hobby, every passion, everything that brings me a genuine internal sense of joy must go. When I drink, I just drink. I'm driving a silver BMW convertible. It's got a number on the back for you Beamer people that lets you know they don't sell this model in the United States. I had to have it shipped here from Europe because I'm that important. I'm dating the prettiest girl in the school. At least that's what you guys thought, so I dated her. I still don't know if I liked her. That's how I'm living my life at this point, to impress people I don't know. And I'm halfway through my senior year. I'm really close to graduating because I got enough credits. I need like 3 more classes, and it's about 6 a.m. and boom, 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 every single door and window come in. I'm on my stomach. They're putting those plastic zip ties on me, and they're hauling me off to the federal penitentiary. For you prison guys, I'm going to make something real clear. I've been arrested a lot up to this point. I'm a jail guy. And in Maryland, jail is any sentence up to 18 months. After 18 months, you go to prison. I'm not a prison guy. I don't like that level of structure and commitment. I respect you all, and I'm aware that I sponsor 2 guys that strive. They're the best AA members in prison. As long as they're serving 5, 10, 15 years, they're sober, they're starting meetings. They're great. They get out, they do a new crime like in a week because they just want to go back. This freedom, it's like that's just too much. I'm the opposite of that. I get really scared in there. You guys look mean. You got more tattoos than me. A lot of you are bigger. I'm not a prison guy, so I want to clear that up. If I've been arrested 36 times. If you pulled my NCIC out, my criminal history, it would not be impressive to anyone in this room. It should just say, you know, drunk and stupid at the top of it. It's all things like drunk in public. My personal favorite was like failure to obey the command of a lawful officer. I don't know if you have that here. That's like a police officer. You're at a party, you're loud, they say, "Sir, be quiet. Please go back in the party." And I say, "Yeah!" Right? And the next thing you know, they're hauling me off. I just can't listen when I'm drinking. So now I'm in the federal penitentiary. My mother was nice enough to save a copy of the San Diego Union Tribune, the Los Angeles Times for me. Those newspapers, the headline read, "Jesuit student, 27 kilos of cocaine." The federal sentencing guidelines, however, that's where the judge doesn't even get to pick how long they're going to lock you up. It's the number of arrests, and they count all those little ones, it turns out. At the 27 kid, they go like that, and they're supposed to lock me up for 46 to 60 years. That's what I said. Because I'm a jail guy. I'm not a 46. I wasn't given any bond because the judge said, the U.S. attorney stood up. There's a couple people I don't like, by the way. I'm still working my way through it. I don't care for prosecutors, cops, judges. They just don't understand the alcoholic very well. And they don't get it that we meant well. I mean, we always mean well. It just... But he says, Mr. Bruckner, if he's given any bond, will flee to Mexico where he'll live a happy and successful life with his business partners. And I hadn't had a happy and successful life anywhere. Not in Baltimore, not on a beautiful little horse farm, not when my parents moved to Ocean City, Maryland, not when I moved to Pacific Beach, California, not when I bought a house in I've been happy and successful. What is this guy talking about? You know, especially now, there's a whole group of people looking to kill me for the 27 kilos I just lost, right? And they bought it. I'm given no bond. I get sent to the federal penitentiary with no bond awaiting trial. couple great things happened in there. The first thing I noticed, I'm the only guy in the entire penitentiary. I believe it holds 1,600 men. 1,599 of those fellas were innocent, and they told me that every day when we go out to the yard, and they would tell stories like I told my whole life. And I now know that what God, or this power that we do, and when I say the word God in the interest of time, I'm talking about whatever pops in your head. I hope that word does not separate us, but the English language is the best we have to communicate. And when I say that word, I hope it brings us together and doesn't divide this room, because I am talking about exactly whatever pops in your head. That's what I'm talking about. And what this power did for me is it surrounded me with enough of me that I was able to see me for the very first time. And this guy told a story like I'd told my whole life. He said, the reason I'm in here is because of my mechanic. And if my mechanic had fixed my taillight, that cop would have never pulled me over. And if that cop hadn't pulled me over, he'd have never smelled the alcohol on my breath. And if he hadn't smelled the alcohol on my breath, he wouldn't have asked me to step out of the car. Arrested me for DUI. They never searched the trunk, incident to arrest, where they found the dope. So you can see that the reason I'm in here is because of that mechanic. And if I ever get out of here and find that mechanic, we're going to get this straightened out. And if I hooked that guy up to a lie detector test, he'd have passed it. Because that's delusion. That's what our book talks about. I believe my own lie. That's not denial. Denial's not in our book. But delusion is. And that means I believe what I'm putting down. The other thing that happened is I realized that I was where I was because of who I was. And I was who I was because of how I live. And I'm going to repeat that because that might be the biggest awakening I've ever had in my life. I was where I was because of who I was. I was who I was because of how I live. In other words, I'm just the sum total of my actions. Y'all are real big on that in AA. I mean, what that means is my tombstone is not going to say, here lies Rich Bruckner, he meant well. Right? Nobody in AA, none of these old dogs that I've been following, I can promise you, Howard's never pulled me aside and said, hey, Rich, I'm real interested in hearing what you think about our book. Are our steps properly numbered? Do you think we should update any of the antiquated language? Perhaps you have suggestions on a new chapter. Nobody's ever asked me any of that. You all care very little about what I think. Some of you care how I feel, certainly not my sponsors, but they care very much what I do. You're watching my feet. My sponsees could care less that I'm here. In fact, they make fun of me for doing this. But they care very much whether I'm a half hour early for my home group making the coffee and doing the things I talk about doing. They're all watching us, and we all carry the AA message. And when absolutely necessary, we use our mouth. This is the least potent form of AA, but our feet. So anyways, I'm in there, and I realized this huge thing for me. Because on a Friday night, I can promise you, that if Charlie said, hey, Rich, what are you doing tonight? I'm taking that Friday, Friday night, you're taking that pregame shower, getting ready to go out on the town, water's hitting, you got that nice hot beer in the shower, sweat's trickling down. There's a feeling of optimism. It's going to be a great night, right? You get out, I can put that nice shirt on, maybe spray a little girl sauce on in case I run into one of you. And it was going to be great. And if Charlie said, what are you doing tonight? I would never have said, hey, Charlie, tonight's the night where I'm going to shame my mother to where she can't look me in the eye for the next decade. What are you up to tonight? Hey, Rich, what are you up to tonight? Well, tonight's the night that I'm going to embarrass my little sister, the only one I got, to the point where she doesn't speak a single word to me for 6.5 years. What are you up to tonight? I never planned for any of that to happen, but it's what happened. And I'm in that institution for a little bit over 9 months. We're coming up on trial. It turns out that a couple days before trial, my lawyers figured out that the DEA had some problems of honesty of their own getting the affidavit for the search warrant. It was determined to be an illegal search. The evidence was suppressed. They had nothing to have a trial, and I was released. And I'd love to tell you that I walked out of that penitentiary a free man, but anybody that's ever been in a penitentiary knows what you are the day you get out. Thirsty. And alcohol owned me lock, stock, and barrel by that point, and I felt like a man without a country. I couldn't stay where I was because there was a lot of people looking for me. I couldn't come back home because I'd shame my family, and I start bouncing around. I went to a town called Ketchum, Idaho, and then to Steamboat, Colorado, from Steamboat to Boulder, from Boulder to Jackson, Wyoming, and I'm like one step ahead of the law. Whenever I drink, I get warrants. Whenever there's warrants, I run away because I'm a coward. Tough guys face the music, they walk through the fire. I don't do that. When there's warrants, I run. Meanwhile, if I run into any of you women, maybe I'm at the $1 Million Cowboy Bar in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. sitting on those saddles, and I buy you women a drink with money that's not mine and sure not legally earned. And you say, what's your story, cowboy? And I say, traveling, babe, just traveling. Like I'm some type of romantic sojourner across our great country. I mean, I'm like one step ahead of the law, but I'm so delusional, right? And of course, I'm offended when I get to your second step. That might suggest I'm a little off. You know, but traveling, babe, just traveling. And I eventually end up where all big shot, tough guy wannabe drug dealers wind up when the federal government takes every bank account, car, house, everything you got. And I end up back on my mom's couch in Ocean City, Maryland. And I'm looking at a lot of smiling and nodding, which means there might be other mom's couch people here. And if there are, that's cool. It's a great place to start your sobriety. There's only one rule at mom's couch, right? She said, Rich, I mean, I couldn't even believe this woman took me back in. I was never, ever, ever, ever going to drink again, and I meant business. And she only had one rule, and you guys know it. You could stay here as long as you want to get back on your feet, as long as... Oh, my gosh. Y'all gave yourself away. There's a lot of mom's couch people here. You stay here as long as you want, as long as you don't drink. And that lasted 2.5 weeks before I picked up a drink. I start... doing what I do. My mom had to get a restraining order. I wasn't allowed 100 yards of her or the house. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I needed some more to drink. I perform a residential burglary on my mom's house because that's who tough guys rob. I'm not robbing, I'm not going in Larry's house. He might hurt me. Tough guys rob mom. And so I break into her house with the restraining order. She sleeps with her little purse under her bed. She's a retired first-grade school teacher on a modest pension, but I don't care. I need a drink. And I've gone through everybody else in my life, because that's another thing about my alcoholism. The more you love me, the more you care about me, God bless you. I will take. I will turn every last hair on your head gray. I'm a taker, I'm a user, I'm a loser, and I don't really care about what's going on except for me. And I'm doing a commando crawl, broken into my mom's house, 3 in the morning, across her bedroom floor. She sleeps with that little purse underneath her bed with her door dead bolted and a restraining order. That should tell you all you need to know about the previous nature of our relationship. And I'm crawling across her bed floor there, and I'm reaching under for that purse, and her eyes come off that bed, and she catches me dead square in the eye, and she said, Rich, take it. Would you just take it? And you can beat me up, you can lock me up, but don't you give up on me, Mom. And that was kind of the opposite of all those things that went right past, those near misses. This was what I call a direct hit, man, right in the heart. And you can do a lot of things, but not when you realize that Mom just had to give up. And it's not that they give up. If you're an alcoholic of my variety, we push these people we love past the point where they have to just be done with us to preserve their own sanity. And then I get to AA, of course, and I tell the biggest lie any alcoholic tells. I was only hurting myself. I was only hurt. Yeah, you were. And I start bouncing in and out of some AA meetings. I mean, I've been sending you all here long enough. I figured I might try it. And I didn't care for, any meeting that had anything to do. If I saw one of those blue and yellow books up front, I left. If they were talking about steps, I left. We have these things in Maryland. I don't even know if you have them here. They're called discussion meetings, where you can talk about pretty much anything you want. It seems like the only requirement is that you don't mention recovery from alcoholism. And I like those meetings because sick attracts sick. Like attracts like. And that's just a spiritual principle. So that's where I'm drawn. There's certain people, I don't know if anybody gets AA resentments. There was a woman named Janine. I hated Janine more than anybody in AA. Janine was 18 years sober. She always carried that book with her at every single meeting. I mean, you're 18 years sober. Haven't you read it yet? I mean, why do you still have the book with you? I don't get it. And if I saw Janine in time, I'd get to another meeting. I mean, I didn't even like being in the building with Janine. Janine didn't call her sponsees. She didn't call them pigeons like they used to. She called them duckies. I mean, right. It's vile. I mean, and they follow her. They got their books, and Janine comes into the meeting, and there's like 6 of them in back of her. And Janine sits down, and then the duckies like file in. And then we get to the end of the meeting. We get to the end of the meeting, and we give out chips for like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. You guys do that here? Okay. And you get like 10 seconds to say how you got 30 days. And then, does anybody have 30 days? And little Rebecca would come bounding up to the front of the room. And I sit in the back, which is where you sit when you're a new prison guy. You got to have your hat on, because I haven't learned that you don't wear hats in a building. It's not a barn. You know, I got my hat down and my collar up, and I'm doing my jail thing. And, you know, I'm hating. And Rebecca's up here going, I got 30 days. Janine's my sponsor. I just did my fifth step Saturday. I think I'm getting free. And here's what I'm thinking in an AA meeting is I'm going to knock her teeth so far down her throat, she will never smile again. And then, does anybody have 60 days? And guess what? Little Cassie comes skipping up. I have 60 days. Janine's my sponsor. This weekend I'm getting ready to start my amends. I'm getting free. And again, I'm thinking I'm going to knock her teeth right down her throat. And then we get to the worst part of the meeting for a guy like me, and that's, does anybody have 24 hours or a desire to start this thing again? And I do the longest walk in AA one more time. One more time. And I decide I can't do what you guys do when I read your steps. I don't have a sponsor. I don't have any guidance. I decide. Right? Alcoholism. I sponsor myself. That's that ism part. And I look at those things, and mostly that fourth step, you all are real big on writing stuff down. The business that I'm in, you don't write anything down. It's called a paper trail. I just got out of the federal penitentiary. When I got to AA, I'm wanted in 3 states. I got warrants. The IRS is after. I haven't filed taxes ever. And you all want me to write stuff down. I mean, like, no. The only problem with that is that I'm dying in your room. I get to 36 days without a drink. I was not drinking. Anybody ever done any not drinking? You know, what are you doing? I'm not drinking. Very different than being sober, you know. You people look sober. There's like a sparkle to the eye, a lightness in the step, and a smile on the face. That is not what I was doing. I was not drinking. And from what I've seen in my years, which are a few by some standards, a lot by others, a little bit over a decade, you know, in my 12th year of sobriety. And from what I've seen, those of us that take ourselves out, most of us do it sober, and we do it while we're not drinking and not changing. And that is a very dangerous place to be in Alcoholics Anonymous, is not drinking and not changing. And I was at 36 days of not drinking and not changing. I'd had my liver biopsied. I was 29 years old. That should have been a hint, but it wasn't. Looking for cirrhosis. Doctor said, don't take any Tylenol. Your liver's in bad shape. It'll shut your liver down for 1 year. No Tylenol. Gave me a special diet. At 36 days, I took as many Tylenol as I could get a hold of in that medicine cabinet. I just wanted to check out because I couldn't go one more day without a drink, and I knew I couldn't take so much as one more drink. I believe our book calls that the jumping off place. And when I did that, my body collapsed. And what I'm going to tell you next, I've been told, and I have no explanation for it, but this wonderful power you all taught me about. My body collapsed and fell into a refrigerator, which thudded against the wall. I live in a crappy apartment because that's where drunks live. And when it hit the refrigerator, the lady next door, she's now told me she hadn't missed a day of work in over 9 years. Perfect attendance record. It was a Tuesday, and she was home sick for the first time in over 9 years. And she heard that thud into the wall, and it scared the daylights out of her. She ran out, and she looked through the front door, and she saw feet lying on the ground, called 911. I woke up back in the Atlantic General Hospital for the 4th time in the same year because of alcoholism. Except this time I'm in one of those paper hospital gowns, the sexy ones that tie up the back. Your butt hangs out. They're very good for the self-esteem. And it came into my consciousness that I couldn't even kill myself right. I'm one of those guys, I couldn't even kill myself the right way. And there's a very special place just beneath loser, reserved for you, that feeling of like, I just can't even kill myself right. And then as my eyes cleared up and I figured out what was going on, and there was all kinds of tubes, the things are beeping. You know who's at the end of the bed? Janine. With the duckies. I'm not sure if there's a place called Alcoholic Hell or not, but I'm pretty sure I was in it. And Janine did not talk to me that day, but she did talk to the Duckies. And she said, girls, because Janine had tried to talk to me plenty of times. But on this day, she just talked to the Duckies. And she said, girls, I want you to take a good look. This is what happens to an alcoholic that refuses to take our steps. Let's go, girls. And that was it. That was it for me. It doesn't go any further. Something inside of me snapped. And I got to tell you, I was a little bit hot when I got into Bill's story and I read that he got that cool breeze and that bright light, and I got Janine and the Duckies. It didn't seem quite right, but it turns out that what happened to me was every bit as significant, because the next thought that went through my head when she left was, if I live through this, if I get out of this hospital, I'm going to find one of those old guys with that book in their hand and that smile on their face, and I'm going to do everything they tell me to do, because that's the only thing I'd never done in AA. See, I'm the guy that'll sweep your floors, I'll make your coffee, I'll set up the literature table, I'll tear down every chair. I'll go to a 7:30 morning meeting, a noon meeting, an 8 o'clock meeting, and get drunk at night. You know? This guy Jim came to me when I went and asked him. I said, Jim, I need some help. And he said something I'd never heard in AA. He said, son, we recover by the steps we take, not the meetings we make. And I had never heard that. But I knew it was true. It resonated immediately. And he explained to me that I have less power than is required to manage my own best decision, to never take another drink of alcohol. That's the first step, right? Powerless, less power. Less power to do what? To manage what decision? He said, can you think of any decision that you've made time and time and time again? I said, yes, Jim, to never take another drink. And he said, how are you doing managing your decision? Not very well, Jim. It was that simple. And that's what you're looking at tonight. I'm a guy that's got less power than is required to manage my own best decision to never take another drink of alcohol, and that means I'm going to need some power. Lucky for me, that's what the rest of this program is about. It's a getting power program. You are never going to hear me frumping around our meetings going, I'm powerless over people, places, and days. Just powerless. My book tells me that we have been given the power. I have to be real clear. It isn't mine. We've been given the power to help where nobody else on the face of this earth can. And I'm not going to downplay that. It's not mine. My job is to fit myself to be of maximum service where I can help that next alcoholic with something substantial, a message of depth and weight when they come into AA, something better than, see you at the next meeting, kid. I spilled more than you drank, and smack them on the butt and say, just keep coming back. That's cheerleading. That's nice, but that is not a substantial message of recovery. And God, what you guys did for me. What Jim did for me, he said, you've obviously come to believe in this power of Alcoholics Anonymous. You've already done step 2. You wouldn't be here. I would submit to you that everybody in this room's done step 2. Otherwise, I'm not sure why you're here. That's what he said to me. Why are you here? You don't get court-ordered to weekend Music City roundups, do you? You might get court-ordered to a meeting, but not to this. You're here because you want to be. You even ponied up a little ching. See? This is the wannabe sober people, right? And what it is, I think, is what I couldn't deny. Why are you here? When I was with you guys, I had a feeling of hope that there was something here for me. I didn't know what it was. I couldn't have spelled it out. I couldn't have told you. But I was okay when I was with you just for an hour. And somehow something inside me knew that there was a solution somewhere inside of you. And he said, if that's true, would you like to make a decision, step 3, to go through with the rest of our program? He told me step 4, having written an inventory, was the only physical evidence of having done a third step. He said, you know what evidence is, kid. That's what they use against you every time in the courtroom. He said, without a written 4th step, you haven't really done a 3rd step. You've just been talking. And the old guys know. Jim had 40-some years sober at that point. He said, we know all the newcomer code. We could decipher it. When you say, I'm working on my 3rd step, has anybody ever been working on their 3rd step? What that is, the old-timers know that when you say, I'm working on my 3rd step, that's secret code for I'm scared to death to do my 4th step. And he knew that. He knew that. He said, just start right. And I didn't have any resentments, and I told him that, and he said, that's fine. He said, you don't have to have any resentments. Just write down who you hate and why you hate them. And that was easy. Like, why didn't somebody say so? It turned out that not only did I have resentments, I just didn't have a very good vocabulary. So I started, and that was, I mean, God, that felt good, right? Right? And we that third and fourth column, and he was getting up there in age, and he turned me over to this guy, Roger. And Roger got me through those next couple steps and saying those prayers. And we had that list. We had it when we took inventory, right? That 8-step list. And I remember telling Jim, I said, well, hold on. I live at the beach. I was at the meeting this morning. Aren't we supposed to do this 5th step at the beach? And after I do the 5th step, we light it on fire and we throw it into the ocean. I heard him talking about it. It sounded like a Viking funeral. It was beautiful. And he said, do what? Light your 4th step on fire and throw it into the ocean? No, that's your 8-step list. It says, why would you set that on fire? Would you please stop going to those BB meetings? And I said, what is BB, Jim? And he said, I don't know, but it's not AA. And then this guy, Roger, looked at me and he said, kid, you're on the 9th step of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a chance where maybe, just maybe, you get to rub the record clean. Maybe you get to die with both sides of the slate even. How free do you want to be? We got everything in Alcoholics Anonymous. We got all kinds of sobriety. You can have whatever you want. We got everything in here from ground beef to filet mignon. What do you want to settle for? Father Ed Dowling told Bill Wilson, the good is the enemy of the best. What do you want to settle for, kid? How free do you want to be? If I was you, I'd start dating your mother. Anywhere that lady would go with you, I would take her somewhere. And that was my first amendment. And I was sweeping the floor in a picture frame shop for $6.25 an hour, an AA member, 20-some years sober, with hand-carved wooden picture frames. And my only job with my little shaky hands was to keep that sawdust up off the floor. And I'd get $6.25 an hour. And all day, every day, we'd listen to AA tapes and CDs now. And I'd listen to all these. I listened to Howard more times than I could tell you. And this is the first time that we've ever gotten to share a conference together. I've been to a retreat with him. He probably doesn't remember, but I do. Because that's how AA works. And they say maybe you shouldn't have AA heroes, but I do. I don't know what to tell you. I hope you do. A guy named Cliff I'd listen to every day, old surfer from Oceanside, California. And I liked him because he was a surfer. And he talked about resentment the way that I did, you know. And he'd hit you with that, do you know where Oceanside is now? And boy, could I relate to that. And I'd say, play Cliff, play Cliff, play Cliff. And I'd sweep, sweep, sweep. And I was getting a little bit better. And every Friday I'd get my little $200 and some paycheck. And I'm paying the IRS back. I owed the IRS $43,000, and that's a lot to some people and a little to others. I always hesitate to say that because there's somebody in this room that's thinking $43,000, I'll just stroke the check. And there's somebody else going, $43,000, I'll never be able to do that. And you know the definition of a large debt? It's yours. You know? So whatever your number, you think it's big. I know that. And that was big for me. And I had no idea how I was going to pay that back $20 at a time. He had me turn myself into the IRS. And he said they're not going to lock up the goose that lays the golden egg. They want their money, not your behind. And I started paying that $20. And 6 years later, somehow it was paid off. Then I got a big check thing from the IRS, and I knew I was in trouble. I went back up to Roger's house, and I said, I screwed something up, and look at this, I'm in trouble. And he looked at it. He said, that's a tax return, you idiot. Normal people get those every year. And I've been getting those for about a decade now, which is pretty cool. You know, I pay them, they give some back. I'm dating my mom, I'm dating my mom, I'm dating my mom. I'm starting to go to those meetings that I didn't used to like. Now I'm drawn to them. Anybody had that? Start going places I didn't used to go. I'm attracted to the people that used to scare me with that weird sparkle in their eye and the lightness in their being. I'm being drawn to those. What's happening is I'm becoming inwardly rearranged, and I'm the last to know it. You all can see it, and you're cheering me on. And one night, after many, many, many dates, my mom's eating spaghetti at Carrabba's, and her eyes come up from that plate of food, and she's talking to me eyeball to eyeball, mother to son, the way that it's supposed to be. And she starts asking me to come over to her house to take out her trash because she's getting up into her 70s and the trash is getting heavy. And can you change a light bulb in my ceiling? I can't stand on a chair. See, because my mom used to ask me to come change that light bulb. Her little kitchenette, it's got a little 2-seater kitchen table, and there's one light bulb up there underneath the cover. And she needs to be able to see to both cook and eat. And she'd say, can you come change this light? And it would take me 2 to 3 weeks to sober up enough, and I'd leave my little mother in the dark to cook and eat. But not anymore, boy. she'd call and I'd be there with this Alcoholics Anonymous thing. With this 9th step, mom calls and son is there. What a change. And this relationship's building and building. And I got to tell you now, to cut this thing short in the interest of time, that I just celebrated my 4th wedding anniversary. It's my first marriage in AA, ever. I got in AA, and we've got a 2-year-old daughter named Isabella. Her birthday was yesterday. And we've got this house like smack on the water. And it's ours. But if you ask my mom to tell the story, she wouldn't be impressed by any of that. What she'd tell you, she'd say, my son, my daughter-in-law, they bought a house 1.5 miles from my house so that I could be near my granddaughter and so that he could help me in my old age and be nearby and I wouldn't have to grow old alone. And she has a guest room in my house, and she's at my house nearly every day to just do something with her granddaughter. Last night she came over to take us all for ice cream for my daughter's birthday and to watch her spill ice cream all over. And that was the happiest grandmother y'all have ever seen. And I'm going to shut up on my mom. I just want to say one last thing to any of the tough guy gangsters that are just coming into AA. Number one, I welcome you and I know how you feel. And all I ever wanted my whole life was to be a man. It was very important to me that you look at me and respect me as a man. And it's real hard to be a man if you first don't learn how to be a son. And that's what I've learned from that deal with my mother. Next was my little sister who hadn't spoken to me. I had a set of Baltimore Ravens season tickets. I don't know why I had them when I got to AA. Every other belonging I had was in a black trash bag. And that's how we are. I mean, I do a lot of work at our local homeless shelter. And those guys are just like me. I mean, they don't have a home, a bank account. They got their family. They got nothing. But they got the new iPhone 6. It's like, why do you have that? Like, why? I don't have that yet. You got nothing, but you got the newest phone, and that's how we are. Our priorities are so out of whack when we get to AA. It's like, I don't have a home, I don't have a bank, but I got season tickets, and my sponsor said, send that first set of tickets to your little sister. She'll like going to the game. You don't even like the NFL anymore now that you're sober. What you liked about the game was having a big tailgate party, slice of beef, having the best bar in the parking lot, being a big shot. By the time the game started, you were so drunk you don't even know who won. And he was right. He was right. And I said, that's stupid, though. These are worth a lot of money. She hadn't talked to me. He said, I'm telling you to send them. And I did, and nothing happened. And he said, send the next set. What happened was my phone rang, and I answered it. And on the other end of that phone was a little girl's voice I hadn't heard in 6.5 years that said, Richie, did you see that? The Ravens just tied it up. They caught the ball in the end zone. They're tied. And I wasn't watching the game, and there was nothing I could have cared less about than who they were playing and who was winning. But I was talking to my little sister boy for the first time in 6.5 years. And I kept sending those tickets, and we started building this little friendship around football. She lived 3 hours away from me. I would drive. I'd finish up my work on Friday. I never had enough money. I never had enough time. It was never convenient to drive 6 hours round trip to my little sister's house. And she bought her first home, and I was driving there on the weekends to help her paint the walls and to lay floor and to fix up that little place. And it was just never... Roger would tell you that if AA is convenient for you, you're doing it wrong. And if I waited until I had enough money to make that amends or it was convenient, you'd have somebody else. But that relationship grew and grew and grew with my little sister over the years. And thank God it did, because she's got 2 little boys now, Sadler and Brixton. They're 3 and 2 years old, and they come to the beach all the time to play with my daughter. And we got 3 little kids that are all growing up under virtually one roof with a grandmother that can barely contain herself, But what happened was this guy called me, and he said, hey, Rich, this is Justin. And I knew Justin. And he said, I know your father is no longer with you, but you've become over the years the number one man in your little sister's life. I'm calling to ask permission if I could have her hand in marriage. And you're looking at nobody less qualified than the drunk that stands before you to give away the hand of a beautiful little girl like my little sister, because I was no kind of big brother to her. And she called the next day and asked me if I'd walk her down that aisle, man. And I got to do that, a sober man with a little bit of integrity and my shoulders back and my head up. And it was one of the best days of my life. And that relationship's just gotten better and better. I had a lifelong friend named Ethan who was next on that list. We'd been friends since this big. He asked me to be the best man in his wedding when I was living out in La Jolla. His father bought me a plane ticket, had me fitted for a tuxedo, had the tuxedo made. I was so excited to be the best man in my best friend's wedding that the night before getting on the plane, I was having a few drinks, to get ready for this wedding. And I don't need to tell you guys the rest of the story. I was too drunk to get on the plane because our book says we get tight at exactly the wrong time. And when I do something like that, you go on a secret list. I keep in deep in my guts of people that I can no longer answer the phone for. That's why drunks need caller ID, right? And if you need to look at the phone before you answer it, you're still living in bondage of self. You could talk to your sponsor about it. I don't have time. But I have a lot of friends in this room, and you all know how I answer the phone. Hello, Rich Bruckner. And that is one of the greatest freedoms that you've given me, because as I stand in front of you, I don't know a single human being on the planet, one penny. I don't have a warrant in a single state. There's nobody looking for me. And that is an amazing feeling. Anyways, I said, Ethan, I called him up because he was next on the list and said, hey, I need 10 minutes if you could please. I know I really screwed up the wedding. I know I was no kind of friend. Maybe your dad could be there. Man, I screwed this thing up so big time. I'm in this thing called AA, and I don't ever want to have to take another drink. Can I have 10 minutes to try to straighten this out? He lived 3 hours away in Baltimore. He said, yes, you could be here 8 o'clock Saturday morning if you can make it. And he remembered. That was about 9 years later. So I think he might have had one of your resentments. And I knew that he'd been telling his wife, I heard she was lovely, what a no-good bum I was, and I heard they had a child and another child, and I knew that he'd been telling them, what a no-good drunken bum I was. And I showed up in that driveway, and his parents' car was there, and I knocked on the door, and Ethan opened that door, and his wife was standing by a center, like a kitchen island with the little girl next to her. And his mother and father were in the back of the kitchen, and what I didn't see was this little boy came darting out of some room in the back of that house, running for me like a freight train, and he grabbed a hold of my leg like a tree trunk, and he looked up at me, and he said, you're my Uncle Rich? Daddy said one day I'd get to meet you. And our book says that 9 out of 10 times when the approach is made in this fashion, the unexpected happens. And what happened with that little kid holding on to me and looking up at me, I had an experience where those scales just fell from my eyes, and I had an inward knowing through the experience that I'm what separates me from you. My stupid inability, my ego to admit when I'm wrong, to face the music and say, I've really screwed it up. How can I fix it? That stupid pride and ego separates me from you, and if I'm separate from you, I'm separate from God. And I knew all of that with the little kid holding onto my leg looking at me. And ever since that day, I've gotten to show up for their birthdays, 6 hours round trip. Christmas Eve, I go to my family and then to his with presents for those kids. They call me Uncle Rich. Birthdays, I show up. Snow days, I drive and take them sleigh riding on this big hill. And you know what they say, little kids? They say, Uncle Rich, you show up on all the good days like it's an accident. But AA lets me show up for all the good days, man. That's what you guys do. You let me show up for all the good days. And the last thing I had on my list, I got pulled over for a DUI out in California. I had some outside issues in my pocket. It was a state-level thing, no big deal. I went in front of the judge. He put me on a program called the PC 1000 First Time Felony Offenders Program, where he said, this carries 5 years, the stuff you had in your pocket. I don't want to put a felony on you if you do what I'm telling you to do, which was really difficult. I mean, it was like 10 whole meetings of AA. You imagine that, 10 meetings of AA to avoid 5 years in prison, to go to some urine tests, do some other things. And he said, if you do this, this will go away and not be on your record. If you fail to complete this, I will give you every day of the 5 years. Are we clear? And I said, yes, Your Honor, I'll be your model guy. And if you hooked me up to a lie detector, I'd have passed it. I wanted to do that, and I believed I would. I had no idea that alcohol owned me lock, stock, and barrel. Alcohol would dictate what I would do and not do. And I screwed it up, and I ran away. And I had to go straighten that out. He said, this is my sponsor. It's good to have a sponsor because they see things very differently. I was almost 2 years sober. He said, this is a good time to go serve that 5 years in California. It's a good time to, get that out of your way. How free do you want to be, kid? It was a nom trying to explain to him, this is a non-extraditable warrant. They're never coming to get me. And he goes, well, that's fine, but every night when you put your head on the pillow, you're wanted. What if you get married one day and have kids? What if your child wants to go to Disneyland? Are you going to lie and say Disney World in Florida is better? You love surfing. That's a pretty big state to not go to. Are you going to drive around? How free do you want to be? And any of this business about faith and fear can't be in the same place at the same time. It's really not my experience. I love the way that sounds, but I was scared to death, and I had the faith that you guys were going to get me through it. And a bunch of my home group members took me to the airport, put me on that plane. I went out and stood in front of the judge. I'd been in and out of the bathroom 3 times that morning. And as I stood in front of the judge, I was sweating, and it wasn't smooth by any stretch. And he said, what do you have to say, sir? And I said, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm almost 2 years sober. We have this thing called the 9th step where I have to try to clean up the wreckage of my past. I made a promise to you about what I do on probation, and I didn't do it. I have to do that 5 years in prison. I'm here to do that because I never, ever, ever want to take another drink. Let's get it started. And what I didn't know, 47 of you took the time to write that judge letters, telling him I was coming, telling him what my life looked like, telling him the guys I was sponsoring, floors I was mopping, things I was doing in meetings of what my life looked like. You guys took the time out of your lives to write that judge letter. And he said he was the most confused looking judge you've ever seen. He was like, I don't know what to do with this. I got all these. He just said, you know what, kid, I ordered you to 10 meetings of AA. They say you've been over 1,000 meetings. You did not do this probation the way that I told you to do it, but you have exceeded every term of the probation. As far as I'm concerned, this case is closed, and if I was you, I would go back to Maryland and do whatever those people in AA tell you. This case is dismissed, and you hit that thing down. And I've been arrested and gone to court 36 times. I've gone to jail 36 times. This was the first time I ever walked out of a courtroom, and I couldn't believe it. My God got a lot bigger that day, and I picked up that phone, and I called Roger, and I had a men's big book study going in my living room, and I said, Raj, tell the guys I'm coming home. We don't have to move the meeting. I'm coming home. And he said, well, wait a second, hotshot. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You can't get a ticket until tomorrow. Why don't you remember those Jesuits that kicked you out? Aren't they right near there in San Diego? Why don't you go straighten that out? And I'm thinking, can we have a moment of celebration? But it seemed like small potatoes compared to that, and I went over to that school, and I met with the same dean. Wouldn't you know it, she was still there. The same dean that kicked me out 9 years prior was still there, and I said, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know if you remember me. My name's Rich Bruckner. I used to go to school here. She said, we remember you, Rich. We've only had one student go to the federal penitentiary in the history of the university. And I said, because of AA, I know what I did. Jesuits, I now know I didn't know when I went here. You guys stand for building men and women of integrity, of doing the right thing, of education. I don't stand for any of that. I didn't stand for any of that when I went here. And I brought a lot of shame to this institution. And those articles that were in the paper made you guys look horrible. And I don't know how to fix this, but I'll do whatever you tell me to do to make it right. And she said, if that's true, kid, come with me. And I walked next door to a building with her I'd never been in. She put a huge stack of papers in front of me and said, fill this out. This is an application to our law school. You're going to go here, you're going to graduate, and you're going to go on to make us proud. That's how you're going to fix this. We like to graduate students. We don't like to kick them out. What makes us look good is having a high graduation rate and alumni that we can be proud of. I called Roger. I said, this dean's lost her mind. I'm a federal felon. I've been arrested 36 times. Even if I make it through law school, which I won't because I'm not smart enough, they'll never let me take the bar exam. And even if I make it through the bar exam and I happen to pass the bar exam, they'll never let me pass the ethics committee. They'll never give me a license, and they'll never let me. He said, shut up. Shut up. Did you just tell that lady you do whatever she said to make it right? I said, yes, I did. He said, then fill out the papers. 3 years later, I graduated second from the top in my class. Not because I'm smart, I just did it the AA way. I showed up 15 minutes early for each class, just like you taught me at the meetings. I shook every teacher's hand every day, just like we do at the doors of AA, until each teacher knew my name and we developed a personal relationship, just like we do with the newcomer. I stayed after class every day and I asked a question, whether I had one or not, just to develop the relationship. And it turns out that what you all taught me right here in AA works many other places. And in wrapping this thing up, I hadn't finished law school, passed that bar exam, and been out of law school for a total of 5 months until my phone rang, and thank God I could answer it. And on the other end of that phone was some guy. It was a weird number, and he said that he was the state's attorney for the state of Maryland. And I know what state's attorneys are. They're the guys that lock me up. And he said he had the governor on the other line, that he just got a large federal grant, and they wanted to hire an assistant state's attorney to head up the narcotics prosecution unit for the state of Maryland. And he was given my phone number that I might know something about the importation of narcotics into our country. Would I care to serve, I repeat, serve the state of Maryland in that capacity? And my knees about buckled. But my second thought, you know what it was? It was you folks. And those old guys with that smile on their face and that book in their hand. And you know what they promised me? They said, kid, one day your sordid past will become your greatest asset. And they never lied to me. They never lied to me. For the last 8.5 years, I've served in that capacity. It was not always easy. The judges are still tricky little devils. They would say things like, will the defendant please rise? And I'd stand up, and they'd say, sit down, and I'd turn all red and get embarrassed. And it takes a while to get used to not being the defendant. But I got used to it. And over the last 8.5 years, I could assure you that I've come up with some very creative sentencing arrangements for our type, because I believe that God has placed me uniquely in a position to be useful, where I look over at that table and somebody, Mike, the sheet says that he committed a first-degree burglary. I happened to notice that he broke into a liquor store at 3:30 in the morning, and the only thing he stole was a 12-pack of Budweiser. That looks familiar. And somebody might see a robber, somebody might see a burglar. I see an alcoholic sometimes. And I get to come up with some pretty creative stuff, and God keeps me right up next to this thing called alcoholism every day of my life. And I got to tell you that every day I get to say two amazing things. Each morning, I walk into that courtroom, and I get to stand there and stand up behind that table and say, good morning, Your Honor, Rich Bruckner for the state of Maryland. And that still trips me out. And each night I get to say the way, way, way more important thing. I get to come somewhere like this, hang out with you folks, and tell you that my name's Rich Bruckner. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks for my life. That's all I got.